welcome to Sarah's Stamping Retreat. Today I've got another paper pad use up video for you. So today we're going to be looking at how we can make the kind of more boring papers in the pack that probably you'd usually just use like as a background, something more interesting and a bit more of a focus on our card. So this is the fourth instalment in this series where I'm going to be using up this whole paper pad. So for those of you who've been following along, thank you so much for all the support you've given this series. It's really great to see how much you're loving it. And for those of you who this is the first time you've even seen this, then I'll link the playlist for this series below, because this is the fourth instalment and we're using up this whole paper pad. So I'm not going to go through the whole paper pad. You can see that on the first couple of videos. I'm just going to show you the pieces that we're going to be using today. So they're all kind of like backgroundy pieces like this. So this one's like fairly innocuous diamond one, and we're going to be using the other piece in this pack that has the same diamond pattern on it as well. So that is this piece here. We're going to be using those diamond pieces for the first 3 cards, and then I'll be showing some interesting ways to use stripy papers for the last 2 cards. So we've got this pink and gold one and this blue stripy one. I don't know about you, but all of those papers would normally end up as backgrounds on my cards. So I kind of challenged myself to think of some interesting ways to use them. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of this paper with the diamonds on it, and I'm going to use the pattern of the diamonds to cut up this paper. And so I'm just using this line here, and I'm going to cut around this kind of like lattice that you can see running through the diamonds. So I'm going to line this up against this line, then I'm going to move it just like maybe, I don't know, 1 millimetre over, and then I'm going to just go down to it nearly meets that line, and I'm going to do the same the other side. So I'm just cutting just slightly away from the line there. So I'm using a metal ruler and a Stanley knife. And I know some people find craft knives a bit of a difficult tool, but I think when you're just doing straight lines with a metal ruler, then that is something that isn't too difficult for most people. Obviously, if you have problems with your hands or struggle to grip something like this, then you could use something like the paper trimmers that have the pointy blade so that you can see exactly where you're cutting. You could use something like that instead if you're not able to use a Stanley knife very safely. So I'm going all in one direction first. I've cut here and here and here and here. And it just makes it easier rather than keeping on moving the ruler around. And you obviously don't need to have this pattern paper to do this. You could do this, just think about cutting apart any of your papers in this way. I think a lot of paper packs have ones that might have square patterns on, or I don't know, octagon patterns or hexagon patterns, anything that's kind of like got the straight sides to it, you could cut apart in this way. And these ones that are going this way, I'm actually going to cut out the smaller diamonds out of the middle as well. So then I'm going to use this line here as the guide. So I'm going to cut just slightly within that line. So I'm sorry if my head gets into any of these, but it's really hard to use a Stanley knife without getting my head in chop. And so then again with these ones that I'm cutting the middles out of, I'm just going to line it up slightly within that line the other side as well. And if you push down firmly on the metal ruler, that should be enough to keep the paper in place while you're cutting. So that's all my cuts that way done. So now I want to cut in the other direction. Most people have a way that they like to cut, so I like to cut downwards. So I'm going to turn my paper in this direction, and then I can do all my cuts this way. And it will depend on whether you're right or left-handed as well, which way you like to cut. So I'm just doing the exact same this way, and I'm just lining up all of those pieces that I've already cut, and so they're going to come away. So now you can see I'm left with this lattice piece. I've got these pieces where I've cut the whole diamond out, and I've got these pieces where I've got kind of the frame and the piece that goes in the middle of the frame. I'm going to use this lattice piece on the first card, so I'm going to put the other pieces to the side for a sec. So then for this card I'm going to use a navy A6 card blank, so that measures 5 7/8 by 4 1/8 inches, and that is the navy matte cardstock from the Paperbox Limited. And I've used the thanks from this Be Bold Glimmer Sentiments hot foil plate set from Spellbinders to hot foil the thanks in gold onto the top of there. If you don't have a hot foil machine, then you can obviously use heat embossing to get a similar look. I'm not going to show the hot foiling in this video because it will end up being too long. But if you're interested in the hot foiling, then I'll link a couple of videos below where you can see an unboxing and where you can see different hot foil techniques. But for now, we're just going to use that. So I'm going to take this lattice piece and I want that to come kind of just under my sentiment. So I'm going to add a bit of glue to the back of this. And I can just trim off the excess. And don't worry, we've not forgotten about the pieces that we've cut out of the middle of here. Those are absolutely going to be used on the next couple of cards. So then I've just got a thin gold strip about 1/4 inch wide that I'm going to just glue across the top of here. So that will just lie under my thanks. And then this piece here, I've cut from the other piece of this paper. So it's one of these border bits. So I've just snipped that out and I'm going to pop that just along there. And I think I'm going to pop that up. So I'm just going to pop that across there. You can see that looks so much more dramatic than just putting the piece of pattern paper itself on the bottom. So let's create another couple of cards to finish off the rest of that paper. So then for this next card I've got another navy blue card blank and I've cut up a piece of the blue diamond pattern in the same way we just did with this kind of beigey colour. So now I've got pieces from the beige piece and pieces from the blue piece, and I'm going to use those to cover most of this card. So I'm going to leave a border down here and then I'm going to cover the rest of the card. And let's add a bit of interest by popping some of these pieces up as well. So these are just some foam strips that I've got. You could obviously cut down foam pads if you don't have foam strips as well. So I'm just going to take the bottom bit off here and then I can add that one here. And then I can cut that excess off and use the rest at the bottom. So now we've added so much more interest and depth to that panel by mixing the colours, by cutting bits out, by popping bits up. It looks so much more interesting now. And then I've got this gold stripe which I've just trimmed off the edge of this paper here. And I'm going to pop that down this side here. And that'll just finish off the edge. Then I've got another foiled thanks, and that's cut out with a die that comes in the same hot foil set. So I'm going to add some of my foam strips to the back of there. I'm really pleased with that. I think it's made a really striking design now. So then for this card I'm going to do an all over pattern using this lattice. So I'm going to glue that lattice on first. So I think even that on its own makes a really nice background, but I want to kind of tart it up a little bit. So I'm going to use some of the bits that we've cut out. I'm going to use some of these smaller diamonds as well. So then you can see that's given us another really lovely background with lots of interest. And I've just got this happy birthday that I've foiled from the same set as the thanks, and I'm going to pop that up on the card. And then there's our third card. And to create that last card, I did have to cut out a few more bits to make up the right places, but I've still got quite a few partial diamonds left that I can use for something else. So I'm just bringing these in to remind you, because these were really quite innocuous backgrounds and we've turned them into something really quite interesting. So then for this next card, I'm going to use this stripy paper, but I want to use it on an angle so it looks a bit more interesting. So I'm going to cut this corner off here, and then I'm going to use that to create the rest of the front of my card. So I can use this edge and cut down from the edge. And I probably should have used my precision trimmer for this. Probably been easier, but never mind, we're doing this now. So then measuring that at 5 7/8, and then I'm going to measure at 4 1/8. And I've tried not to cut big lines so that I don't waste too much paper, but you can also use these pieces for, so pretend that's my card bling, you can use them to create kind of cut-about cards. So you can cut down here for that one and cut across here on that side, and then you've kind of used up those pieces. But for today we're going to use this, and you can see now I've got a nice diagonal stripe, which I think is a bit more interesting than the vertical horizontal stripe that we had before. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to take some more stripes out of it. So I'm going to cut along the edges of the stripes. So I'm going to cut that one, and then I'm going to pop my sentiment in here. So I want to make sure the next cut is big enough to pop my sentiment in. So I'm going to cut just the other side of this gold stripe. And that piece can obviously be used on a different card. So now I've got all my pieces, and I'm going to piece this back together so I know where all the pieces go and what the spacing is supposed to be like. So you can see how that's supposed to be. So I'm going to put those together. I'm just not going to glue down the strips that I cut out. You can see this is slightly bigger than my card base, so I'm just going to trim off this excess. So I was going to put this thanks like this. You could still obviously do that if you wanted to. I decided to go with this thank you instead. So that's from this thank you and happy birthday hot foil plates. It's called Stylish Script Thank You and Happy Birthday. You can see these pieces are really easy to use as kind of like borders on cards and things, so I'll be keeping those. So we've just opened up that a bit and added a little bit of interest by adding in that blue to the stripe. And for my final card, I've got a piece of this blue stripy paper, and I've cut it the same width as the card blank. I'm going to use another A6 card blank, but this time I've used an acetate card blank. And so I've cut this the same width as the card blank, and it's 4 inches high. I'm going to use a piece of this Sizzix adhesive sheet. I found that this is really good for sticking to acetate without being able to see the glue too much through it. So I'm going to cut a piece to fit this. And then what I'm going to do is to cut this up. So I'm going to use the lines on the stripes as a guide, and but I'm not going to cut every stripe, so I'm going to cut them into panels. And I'm differing the sizes of the panels to add interest. And then what I'm going to do is glue these up the front of my card using the adhesive sheet backing. You can see I've laid out the pieces to the side so that I know I'm going to get a nice layout. I'm also using the grid lines on my craft mat just to kind of guide where I'm putting them so that I know that they're kind of straight. So then I want to cut a flower for the front of my card, so I'm going to cut this one here. Though I have actually just thought that maybe it'd be quite cool to come from the side of the card, so maybe I'll cut this one here. So then I want a panel to write on, but I don't want white to show through here, so I'm going to put a piece of navy cardstock that's an inch smaller than my card front inside the card. Then I'm going to put a white panel behind that to write on, because I want the navy as opposed to the white to show through the acetate. So I want to use these Sizzix sheets again, and actually I should have shown you. You can see, you can barely see any of the glue through there. It works really nicely, so it doesn't look all disgusting inside your card. So I'm going to cut a piece for this blue, and I'm going to cut it a bit smaller than my blue, and you'll see why in a second. So I'm probably cutting it about 1/4 of an inch smaller than my blue. And then I've got this white piece, which is an 1/8 of an inch smaller than the blue, so that you can see the blue around it. So you've got this nice little kind of border around it at the back. Makes the back look nicer as well. And that is the reason why I wanted the glue smaller on the blue piece, so that you wouldn't see the glue through round on that border. So now I can cut a piece for the white. I like these Sizzix permanent adhesive sheets better for working with the acetate than normal adhesive sheets, because it's like a flat glue rather than a film, so it means that you can't see it as well through the card. So then I want to pop this up on some dimensionals, but I don't want to see the dimensionals through. So I'm going to make sure that the dimensionals or foam pads go only into this area here on the stripes. So I'm going to make sure they go on the stripes. Now I'm also going to put some foam back here. I'm going to put a bit of glue on the TH because that's going to go over the flower. So let's just take a look at those stripy ones. So we've got this stripy paper to make this, and this stripy paper to make this. And I hope you agree that they look much more interesting. So then there are today's 5 cards. I really hope that you've enjoyed them and that it's given you some ideas of how to make your more boring papers more interesting. I'd love to know which is your favourite. Please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, I'd really appreciate you clicking like below. You can also press subscribe if you'd like to see future videos. If you press the bell button and select all, then YouTube will also notify you when I've got a new video available. All of the products that I've used to create today's cards are listed in the description below, and there's also a link there to my blog where you can find a picture supply list if that helps you find what you're looking for. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to see you again soon.